St. Paul Sunday Morning is produced by Minnesota Public Radio for National Public Radio. This program is made possible with funds provided by the Northwest Area Foundation, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and the National Endowment for the Arts.
Okay, stand by, please.
Welcome to St. Paul Sunday Morning. This week, our guests are the members of the Primavera String Quartet. Join us now in the studio for a Sunday morning of chamber music. Here's your host, Bill McLaughlin.
Okay, Bill.
Well, good morning. Welcome once again to Studio M for St. Paul Sunday Morning. Today we have as our guests the Primavera String Quartet, four young American instrumentalists who've come very highly recommended to us. And I thought until this morning I'd never met any of them, but then when I walked into the studio I saw Martha Caplin. Sort of a role reversal. Usually conductors remember musicians better than vice versa, and you remembered me and I didn't at first. Martha, it's good to have you here.
How could I forget you?
Martha, you can work on the show any Sunday morning if you That was exactly the right thing to say. Martha and I'd worked, it was years ago really, at White Mountains Festival. Mm-hmm. And have you been back there at all since?
Only for the North Country Chamber Players, which was in the same area. That was a festival run by Don Palma, bass player.
Yeah, bass player extraordinary.
Yeah.
We've had Mike Willens, another member of the Times Square
Yes.
Bass Quartet. He's been here a couple of times with the Smithsonian Chamber Players, playing viola, with the rigatoni strings and all.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
So I get to see a few of those people. It was nice to see you again.
Thanks.
The other members of the quartet, we have Catherine Metz, who's a second violinist and the newest member of the group, I think, are you?
That's right, that's right.
How long have you been with you?
Since about October, since this season
yeah.
started, actually.
It seems like a lovely quartet to play with. You all look like you belong well together, so... sometimes you see groups come in and they don't seem to have much fun. You guys are all smiles, and I hope it lasts. It's a good line. You know who said that? One time, Teco, our concertmaster here, told me, it was as Napoleon was being crowned Emperor of Europe. He was crowning himself, and his mother turned around and whispered to a friend, "I hope it lasts." So I think that almost every day. Our violist is Diann Jezurski.
Bravo.
Oh, good. Well, you coached me a little
The
bit.
pronunciation was terrific.
And you're married to a brass player as well.
Yeah,
Somebody,
I'm
Mary
married.
was mentioning.
Yeah, I'm married to Sam Palafian.
Oh, the tuba player.
Yeah.
Empire Quintet, with whom we had to connect. It's the most spectacular young bunch of instrumentalists I know of in that way.
Oh, they're terrific.
Yeah.
Not that I'm prejudiced.
That's nice. Did you? He had been in Boston, hadn't he, Palafian?
He still is. He teaches at Boston University. I live in Boston.
Mm. And Melissa Meell is the cellist.
Bravo on another name.
Well, again, I've had a little bit of coaching. This is fun.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, Melissa, you live in Boston too? How do you all find spot to rehearse?
I live in New York. Actually, we've been rehearsing at my apartment mostly. Kathy and Diane maintain residences in New York,
Mm-hmm.
so we rehearse intensively when they're here.
Mm-hmm. And then you can go out for tour or whatever
Yeah.
recitals that you have in town.
Yeah.
Let's let the folks hear a little bit of how you play. You've chosen the sort of the father of the string quartet, Joseph Haydn, to start with. And from a little bit I've been able to see, it seems to be one of the earlier Esterhazy quartets, a set called the Sun Quartets, all written around 1772 or so. And we're going to hear the C major quartet from that group. It's the quartet in C major, Opus 20, number 2, in 4 movements. There's Moderato, there's an Adagio C minor. Menuet with a little C minor trio. It's a trick that Mozart liked to sometimes. The dissonant quartet has that same device there. And then Fuga for the last movement, Allegro. So this is the members of the Primavera Quartet to play Haydn Quartet in C major, Opus 20, number 2. You'll probably want to take an A after I've talked so long. this is. It's one of the son quartets of Joseph Haydn. Quartet in C major, Opus 20, number 2. Played for us this morning by Primavera String Quartet. What a spectacular piece this is. I'm embarrassed to say I don't know it before this morning. You really
It's not played very much.
give me a treasure. What an incredible piece. It's real strong music. And some of the other Esterhazy quartets are later, I think, in comparison to this.
Yeah.
And what clever things he does, that operatic slow movement almost, this solemn
Recitative.
unison with which you begin, and then this recitative and the cello alone and then the violin alone, and then flowing into the minuet. That was quite an inspiration too, that there's no pause really between slow
Yeah.
movement.
The
How did
last movement has such strange entrances too, little fragments of things that it's so unique.
Yeah, this is the one spot where our listeners have to use their imaginations. They can't see the incredible body language that goes on with a good string quartet. It's really fun for me to be, whatever this is, 3 or 4 feet away from you. And I have to be careful, because if I tap my foot or toss my head when you play something wonderful, I worry, am I going to send a message to you? It's right. Yeah, but you communicate so well. This is a very interesting quartet, the four of you.
Thanks.
You do a lot of things very carefully. It's obvious you spend so much time thinking about them, and then by the time you do them here, it feels as if it's just instinct. It doesn't feel thought out at all. It's very clever what you do.
Thank you.
That's really lovely.
Thanks.
Yeah, I wish that the listeners could see. Here's Melissa hunched over a cello. Every time she picks up a couple little notes from the violin, and Martha like a diva, really. Some of those wonderful solo lines here. It's interesting too the way he has the unison so often in
Yeah.
this piece. And the finale is very striking, because you go from the fugato, all these different voices, and there's something I think a lot of times listeners don't realize is it's probably harder to play unison than it is to play in harmony.
Yeah.
Much harder.
A lot of time with intonation and to make a blend of sound. It shows up so quickly.
In a string quartet, you can have that opinion. You can have the matter of opinion about intonation, rather than with the piano sitting there saying "I'm right." So everybody can hear notes a little bit differently. So.
How does that work? I mean, sometimes I see with the wind players, they have one of these Korg electronic tuners, and that's sort of, it does no more than a piano, except that it's perhaps even slightly more accurate, because it's, as long as your electric current supply is accurate, then it'll be exactly an A, it'll be exactly an A flat. What you're talking about is much more subtle and more interesting. How do you do that?
Well,
We argue a lot.
we argue a lot. That's one thing. It depends on the kind of sound we want. I mean, if we're looking for a really minor or flat leading tones or things, it becomes a real matter of opinion rather than based on the open strings. We try to keep our open strings in tune as much as possible, and together. I tune my lowest string, the C string, a little bit higher so that there's not such a great distance between my lowest string, the C, and the violin's highest string, the E. So that mine's a little higher and their E might be slightly
I wonder,
lower.
could you show us a little of that? Would you mind?
Well, let's see.
If this doesn't work, we'll tell them it's just an experiment.
We can tune it absolutely true and show how sharp the E sounds if it's absolutely right.
I'll tune my C where if I was playing alone, it would sound
If you're
okay.
playing a perfect fifth against your G, in other words, your low G.
Yeah, let me see. This is the hardest string to tune on this particular cello. Okay, I might put it about, say, there.
Now, if you were to play your open E against that, Martha, what happens? Oh, my word.
It's not a third at all.
It's real super bright. Yeah.
So I put it, if we can find it. It's not going. About there.
There you have it, yeah. It seems that this is something about which you can have agreement. Does every quartet do this, do you think?
Not every quartet. I think a lot of quartets do.
How about with the viola? Do you do a similar kind of thing with your low
Oh,
C?
yeah, same thing that the cello does.
Just cheat up a tiny bit.
Yeah, so in fact, it's really not perfect fifths that we're tuning,
Mm-hmm.
but the lower string's always sharp to the upper strings.
Even we do that. Even the violins tune the Ds and the Gs just slightly, not as much as they do, but a little bit higher so that we bring ourselves closer together too.
Uh-huh.
It helps a lot.
And then there's the question that you brought up too, Melissa, of the key that you're playing, and a note needs to favor a certain direction. It needs to push up a little higher or
Yeah.
settle down. If it is a minor key, it's wonderful to have it sort of flat and
Yeah.
grumpy almost.
Yeah. In the Bartok that we're going to play later, for instance, there are a couple pitches in there that we really like to play right on the edge of being sharp, so that the audience has to sit up a little bit.
Yeah, it has that brilliance
more.
then, and it
Yeah.
it does. It's something you can see.
It makes you want it to resolve so badly.
And if it's first quartet, occasionally it does resolve it. When you get to the third quartet, there's no resolution in it at all.
Right.
I'm going to ask you a really dumb question. You're a quartet of young American women.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make you Are there other women quartets of any stature, do you know?
Not at the moment that we know about. But there may
Secondly,
be.
do you feel any calling to champion women's music, since there's been...
I think we feel more of a calling to play American music. That's, to include that in our repertoire is very important to us. And if it happens to be a woman, well, so much the greater, But we just try to pick American pieces that we feel are really great pieces of music,
And you
which
have-
we feel this is.
What we're talking about now is the next work is a work of Ruth Crawford Seeger. She later married Charles Seeger, who's a composer, musicologist. Actually, he outlived her. He was older than she. I did pick up some stuff. I hadn't known very much about him. I know he taught at UCLA and Harvard and Princeton. He taught all over. He was an ethnomusicologist, one of the very first of them, really, in America. Kind of did what Bartok was doing and Dokhniani and some of the others. But he started out as a composer and as a conductor. For a while, in fact, he conducted the orchestra in Cologne. I don't know how he went over in 1910 and wrested away the the conductorship of one of the great German orchestras. But for an American musician, it must have been unusual. But we're talking now of a woman, Ruth Crawford, born in Ohio, educated all over Jacksonville, Chicago. Finally made her way to New York around 1929, where she met this Charles Seeger. He was teaching at what was then the Institute of Musical Arts. It was the precursor of Juilliard School. And she started to study composition with him, and they were married some years later. In 1930, she got a Guggenheim and went to Berlin and then to Paris. And the quartet you're about to play from 1931 is, I think, right at that period. I'm not sure whether...
It's very, very much like the European composers of that period, so she must have been influenced by people like Berg or the European composers.
That's right. Lyric quartet would have been, lyric suite would have been well known. And some, I don't know whether the Bartok quartets would have been known to her at that point or no. Bartok had been in this country a couple times, I think in the early 20s, and then again around 27, 28, 29, something like that. In fact, I think the third quartet may have been written in this country, so it's possible that she could have known some of this music. But the little bit of her music, is very original, very much her own still, for all that it sounds like 30s music.
Yeah.
If you can think a bit at home, if you're imagining Art Deco, it was sort of the high point of that period, and skyscrapers and structural steel used in a different way, poured concrete, all of that. This music has some parallel, I think.
It really does.
So I'll let you play it, and we can talk about it a little bit afterwards. This is a quartet, 1931, of Ruth Crawford Seeger. Once again, we'll be listening to Primavera String Quartet.